Hello and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Sarah.
And I'm Ben.
Thank you for listening to us today. How are you, Ben?
I'm doing pretty well, all things considered. We live in interesting times, but like on a personal level, I think I'm doing all right.
What's nice is that statement can be evergreen.
Right. It doesn't matter when the episode comes out.
Oh, they must be talking about when the Liberal Party just elected their new leader. Oh, they must be talking about the on-off about the tariffs.
Oh, they must be talking about like Mothra's latest attack on Montreal.
Latest?
Yeah,
What the fuck did Montreal do to Mothra?
Mothra
only takes revenge.
They made some mistakes. The latest Just for Laughs festival didn't go well.
They pulled the two twin fairies to perform.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Their song was calling Mothra to wreck the city.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I love this.
I'm just saying, I don't know when you're going to be listening to this episode.
Absolutely. But we are thankful that you are listening. I myself am doing all right this coming up week because we record this on a Sunday. So this coming week is going to be crazy bonkers busy with everyone across sales and marketing in town.
Well, at least that means it's a good thing that this episode doesn't come out until the week after that.
Yes. In any case, I'm glad that we are here now.
Yes.
What are we watching today, Ben?
Today, Sarah, we are watching Taste of Fear from 1961, directed by Seth Holt.
Right. I remember when you first told me this title, I was really excited for like a chef serial killer or something.
That would be fun.
It would be very fun. Yes, I know that the menu exists, but like not in 1961, apparently.
Yeah. I once wrote audio
drama.
An episode of a radio horror anthology show about cooking people. Anyways, as far as I know, the title doesn't have anything to do with like actual literal tasting. Like it's just like, it could have been called like a hint of fear or a whiff of fear or something.
In fact, it was also called Scream of Fear.
Yes, in the United States, because this is originally a UK film. And it was written by our old friend, Jimmy Sangster.
What has Jimmy been up to?
Well, by 1961, Jimmy Sangster was sort of tired of being Hammer's go-to writer for like Frankenstein, Dracula, and their other gothic horror pictures.
Ugh, regular work.
Success.
Poo-poo.
Yeah. Sangster had worked on commission for Hammer, and you may recall that, in fact, he was like a production designer at first, and then sort of like stumbled over backwards into being a writer. And Hammer would come to him and be like, we want the next Frankenstein, we want the next Dracula, we're doing the Mummy, we're doing, whatever. And he would write these scripts. And he felt he needed to break out from this mold, get work from people other than Hammer, or even from like, because he has done some non-Hammer movies, but they've been clearly from people wanting him to like
do the Hammer style.
Yes, exactly. So he decided that to break out from all of this, he needed to write a spec script that he could ship around. Sarah, do you know what a spec script is?
It's like a loose outline. This is my guess. A loose outline that is like, here's probably what will happen, but it's very loosey-goosey to adapt to whatever the person or studio might maybe want.
So you've kind of got...
I'm assuming spec is short for speculative.
It is. The speculative part is they are speculating that you're going to want this. So in a lot of cases with screenplays, like the studio decides we're going to adapt Anna Karenina again. We're going to hire Sarah Rowe to adapt it from the book, etc. Or like, hey, we're making, Batman 5. Like, we're going to hire Ben Rowe to write the script.
How come you get Batman and I get Anna Karenina?
I don't know. I was just thinking of movies that get remade a lot.
I've literally never even read Anna
Yeah,
Karenina.
I mean, I'm sure most people who've written scripts for it haven't. Anyways,
why do you hate this so much? Please continue.
The point is that what is much more rare is like you sit in your house and you think, the perfect movie. And then you write a script that no one has asked for. And then you go to a studio and you say, can I make this, please? That's a spec script. You're writing it on the speculation that someone will want it.
Okay.
So no one's asked for it. And this is a lot rarer because no one paid you to write that script. And if no one likes it, no one will pay you to write it. And these days, a lot of spec scripts aren't even written with an intention of ever getting made. They are written to be a writer's like calling card. Like, ooh, I wrote this cool original screenplay that would be a really great movie. Does that mean I can write the new Marvel picture now?
I thought you were going to say something about today, spec scripts are comics.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of. Anyways, Sangster decided to write a spec script and shop it around and see if he could get some interest at some different studios. Now, Sangster's screenplay drew comparisons to Psycho when the film was finally released, but like the movie started shooting in October of 1960 and Psycho had come out in like June of 1960. So the timeline suggests that Sangster wasn't influenced by Psycho so much as Le Diabolique, which is the film that influenced Psycho.
Yeah, and I mean, when we covered Psycho, I also talked a lot about the ongoing like newspaper and trials around the dude who I don't remember the name of.
Ed Gein?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me.
You're welcome.
So I would imagine like if there is connections to Psycho, it's likely because they were also still drawing off of Ed Gein.
The thing is that this movie really does draw from Le Diabolique. It's about some people trying to like scare a person with a health condition to death. There's like a body hidden in a pool at one point.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's pretty close.
Yeah, I think the comparisons to Psycho were really because of one particular element in the story and also just Psycho being a lot more like recent at the time when the film came out. But yeah, there are a lot of similar elements between this and Le Diabolique. Now, Sangster shopped his spec script around and he ended up selling it to British film producer Sidney Box, who had been working in British film for like decades, like since the 30s. His biggest hit was a film in 1947 called The Seventh Veil. And so Box like bought the script and the deal was that like Sangster would get to produce it. And then Box promptly suffered a heart attack. And it was like, okay, we're going to put this on the shelf until like I'm feeling better and more healthy. And then that was like not happening very fast. And so Sangster thought that the project was going to vanish into obscurity. So he bought the script back and was like, okay, let's try someone else. Now, this whole process had made the script known and valuable on the market, right? Because like he had shopped it around to a bunch of people and then someone did buy it. So it's like, okay, there must be something here, which meant that the producer who was now most excited to buy it from Sangster was Michael Carreras at Hammer.
Awkward.
So having written this script to get away from Hammer, Sangster now found himself selling the script to Hammer. His condition for this was that he be allowed to produce the film, just like his deal with Sidney Box. Now, Hammer at the time was exploring a new partnership with Columbia Pictures in the United States, and Columbia was kind of going through a bit of a change in identity at this point. For a long time, Columbia had been kind of like the minor major or like the biggest B-movie studio, depending on how you were looking at it.
Yeah.
But the studio's founder, Harry Cohn, had passed away in 1958. And Columbia was going through some restructuring, and they had some like new ambitions. They wanted to be producing like higher quality, like A picture fare, but they still needed B pictures to round out the schedule. So they had this deal with Hammer for Hammer to provide them with like dependable B pictures, and in exchange, Columbia would give them funding, access to American markets, and American stars.
So the usual relationship that Hammer would have.
Yeah, with any American, producer. But Columbia was, okay with taking a chance on Sangster as a new producer if Hammer would cast Susan Strasberg in the lead for this film. Now, as you might expect from the name, Susan Strasberg was the daughter of Lee Strasberg, who was the director of the Actors Studio in New York and the popularizer in America of method acting, like the Lee Strasberg School of Acting.
That's why the name is familiar. Okay.
Yeah. Susan was born in New York in 1938. She began acting at 14. She was educated at the top art schools in New York for acting and made her film debut at age 17. That same year, in 1955, she originated the role of Anne Frank on Broadway. She was nominated for a Tony Award and was the youngest Broadway star at the time to have her name above the marquee.
Can I ask a tangent question?
Sure.
Anne Frank on Broadway?
Yeah.
Was it a musical?
No, it was just a play. You can have just regular plays on Broadway.
Yeah, I'm just double checking.
Yeah, it was a pretty highly acclaimed, theatrical adaptation. However, Strasberg was not chosen to reprise the role for the 1959 movie version, which was an adaptation of the play, possibly because the film's director did not want to deal with Susan's parents influencing the movie.
That's fair.
So in 1960, at the age of 22, Susan went to Europe to see how her career could fare on her own, sort of separate from her famous parents.
Mm-hmm. Nepo baby tries to make it on her own.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how she ended up in Taste of Fear. Now, directing Taste of Fear is Seth Holt, who at the time was an up-and-coming editor turned director. Born in 1923 in Palestine, Holt was educated in London and originally trained to be an actor. He began working at Ealing Studios in 1943 as an editing assistant, and by 1950 he was a lead editor. He was promoted to producer in 1954 and directed his first feature film in 1958 before leaving the studio in 1959. Holt continued to edit until getting his second feature film, which was Taste of Fear at Hammer. Now, Holt was considered a promising young director. Young, he was 38, but a promising director with great potential. But his later personal life would have kind of a descent into alcoholism that negatively affected his career and prematurely ended his life. We're going to be talking more about that in future episodes because he'll be directing more films for Hammer.
Okay. So he establishes himself as a director at Hammer, though the rest of his career does not go super well.
Yeah, but he had this reputation as oh, this kid's going to go far. And so Tragic. A lot of, the story around his career is this unfulfilled potential. Taste of Fear's cinematographer was Douglas Slocombe, the World War II documentarian turned consummate director of photography, whose work we previously saw in Circus of Horrors. Slocombe had shot Kind Hearts and Coronet in 1949 and would go on to be known for The Lion in Winter, The Italian Job, Jesus Christ Superstar, and all three original Indiana Jones pictures.
Cool.
Yeah, so big deal cinematographer.
Yeah.
Sangster instructed Slocombe to shoot the picture in black and white, and the money saved was spent on location shooting in Nice, the French Riviera, as well as interior shooting at Elstree Studios next door to Stanley Kubrick's Lolita production.
Okay.
As for the rest of the cast, aside from Susan Strasberg, the lead male in the cast here is Ronald Lewis, who was at the time something of a minor star in Britain. He was born in Wales in 1928, and he'd been acting on stage since 1950. He had risen to stardom in films through the 1950s, becoming a lead actor at Rank. But by 1958, Rank made the decision not to renew his contract, and his career began to flounder. He was picked up by Hammer, however, for the Val Guest thriller The Full Treatment in 1960. And then he does this film for Hammer, and he does like a few other horror films after that.
Okay.
So we're going to be seeing him again. One of the other notable names in the cast is Anne Todd, who is an actress born in 1907 and had achieved fame for her role in The Seventh Veil in 1945, which was Sidney Box's biggest hit. She was married to director David Lean from 1949 to 1957 and starred in 3 of his films. By this point, however, her career was kind of winding down. She would end up retiring from acting in 1965. So this is kind of a later picture for her. She was, in her 50s at this point, and she thought this was a terrible movie.
No!
She couldn't stand Susan Strasberg and like the method acting thing.
Yeah.
Which, like, to be fair, was a pretty common attitude among like older, like Shakespearean theatrically trained actors. Like Laurence Olivier hated method acting famously, right? So I think that informed a lot of her frustrations working on this film.
Yeah.
Finally, we have Christopher Lee here. He has been cast in the movie in the role of the Red Herring. Much the same way that like Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi used to get put into movies just to not be the guy, right?
What did we watch recently? It was the Lucille Ball movie.
Yes, where she's like working for the British police trying to track down like
everyone's in that movie. George Zucco.
Yeah, Boris Karloff's a red herring in it.
George Zucco's briefly a red herring.
George Sanders is the love interest.
Yeah.
Gosh, what is that called? It's a Douglas Sirk picture. It's all about
Lured. That's
Lured.
What it's called. And
That's right.
I think it's from like 49 or so.
Yeah, around there.
See, we watch movies for not the podcast that are still somehow related to horror.
That's true. Anyways, Christopher Lee, cast in the picture. He was definitely deliberately cast as a red herring, but despite having a small part, Lee called Taste of Fear the best film Hammer ever made, and Seth Holt one of the best directors Britain ever had.
Damn, that's really high praise.
Now, to be fair, anyone who knows a lot about Christopher Lee knows that he didn't have a particularly high opinion of Hammer and the movies they made. So, just as a...
Sure, but to say, like, even if your general opinion is, like, ambivalent at best, to say that this is, like, the best director or the best movie says something.
For sure, yeah. I just want to, like...
temper expectations.
Exactly. Like, if you're like, yeah, like, I hate eating mushrooms, but, like, these are the best mushrooms I've ever had. It's like, does that mean the mushrooms are really good, or does that mean like they're acceptable? I don't know. So Taste of Fear debuted in the UK on June 5th, 1961, and in the US under the title Scream of Fear on August 22nd, 1961. The film was a big hit in the US, the UK, and Europe, leading Hammer and Sangster to return to this well for similar psychological thriller titles throughout the 1960s.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because when we covered La Diabolique, it was early enough in that growing trend of psychological thrillers that it was like, is this thriller? Is this horror? And we had a pretty robust debate about it. So it'll be really interesting to see if this movie kind of continues that trend, if it falls back a bit closer to horror, what goes on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Critics at the time identified the similarities with Psycho and La Diabolique and didn't think Sangster or Hammer were kind of up to the task for this kind of film. I find it really interesting because like the critical reaction, especially in Britain, to Psycho was so hostile.
Yeah.
But by like a year later, they're looking at Hammer and being like, you guys aren't good enough to make a Psycho. Like, the film already has kind of a legendary status just a year later.
Who made Peeping Tom? I don't think that was Hammer.
No, that was Michael Powell. I don't remember what the studio is, but like, it was his kind of regular group, right?
Okay, I'm just curious because, they really hated that too, but of course did not give it the same kind of status.
Well, I feel like sometimes there are things that British critics will let Americans get away with that they won't let British people get away with.
Yeah, but Hitchcock's British.
Sure, but it's an American film, I suppose. I think the British, at the time at least, were maybe used to the idea of Americans being more crass.
I guess.
It's only 1961. The first James Bond movie hasn't come out yet and had an opportunity to tell the world that British people fuck. Anyways, while the critical appraisal of Sangster and Hammer was low, Seth Holt's direction was singled out for praise.
Okay. So how are we watching this movie?
Well, like a lot of Hammer films, Taste of Fear is not available for streaming in North America, but it has been released on Blu-ray by Indicator.
Okay. Well, folks, hopefully you can find a copy to watch along. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss The Taste of Fear, directed by Seth Holt from 1961.
See you on the other side, everybody. Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching Taste of Fear from 1961, directed by Seth Holt. Sarah, what did you think?
This was really good. I can definitely see why people were like, Seth Holt, the up-and-comer talent. But I think the cinematographer was also like quite keyed in to what we were wanting here. I think the actors were quite keyed in. I thought it was very interesting how you said in the context setting that the actress who plays the mom figure here had some contention with our lead actress because of method acting. But I don't know if that's true in the sense of like, what if that was just said after the fact because there's such good contention on screen? You know, like, yeah, everything just felt very good. I really enjoyed this. What did you think?
I thought this was pretty spectacular. I really loved this.
Yeah, I think it's a really great example of how to try to explain the difference between film noir and gothic horror.
Interesting. I can definitely see that.
Well, let me tell the folks at home what the movie is about. As Ben kind of set in the context setting, the big inspiration here is Le Diabolique. But I would argue that, like, yes, that is the case, but it's not like, okay, now here's that scene from that movie or that scene from that movie. It's very much an inspired by rather than a straight adaptation.
Yeah, for sure. It's sort of building on Le Diabolique.
So when the film opens, we are on a lake and we see some men in rowboats. They are speaking German and they are clearly like combing the lake for a dead body. When they find it, they pull it out. It's a dead woman. And then we roll the credits. After the credits, we see heiress Penny. She is arriving in Nice in France. And some context is that she is in a wheelchair. She's picked up by her father's chauffeur. His name is Robert. And we learn that Penny is here to see her father, who she has not seen for 10 years. As I said, Robert is his chauffeur, and Robert explains that her father isn't actually here right now. He's actually left on a business trip, and also kind of alludes to the fact that he might have been ill for some time. Now, Penny's stepmom, Jane, is home. Penny has never actually met Jane, and during dinner, we get to hear a bit of Penny's backstory as she catches Jane up. Basically, Penny's parents divorced around 10 years ago, in which case her father went to France and her mom took Penny and went to Italy. There was a horse accident around 9 years ago where a horse basically fell onto Penny and left her paralyzed. And her mom has died about a year ago. So before Penny's mom passed away, it was just her mom, and her aide, Maggie. And since the mom passed, it's just been Penny and Maggie, her only family and friend. She entered a deep depression when her mom died, so was very excited to hear from her father, who sent a letter inviting her to live with him in France. That night, Penny is falling asleep when she sees a light across the courtyard in the summer house. Now she gets up to go investigate, and upon opening the door, she finds a candle and her dead father staring at her.
Yes, very dramatic paradox.
She leaves suddenly, screaming, and as she wheels herself across the courtyard, she ends up kind of falling into the pool that's right there, and Robert rescues her. She wakes up in kind of a panic, and this is when she meets a Dr. Gerard. We'd kind of heard about Dr. Gerard here and there so far. Basically, Dr. Gerard is her father's friend and would come over frequently to basically play chess. Robert thought it was because of ill health that a doctor was visiting. But Jane explains, like, no, your father wasn't ill. I don't know why Robert would say that. Now, that night is the first of many spooky experiences that Penny will face. Each time, she believes she's seeing or hearing her father, but there's no evidence once other people come in. And Jane and Dr. Gerard start to question, like, is this all in her head?
Very classic stuff.
Very classic. Now, the reason why Jane and Dr. Gerard are not sure about Penny's experiences being real, because when she was a young girl, her imagination was very overly active, and she's never really fully grown out of that. And Dr. Gerard goes so far to even say at one point, like, you need rest. Last night was quite terrifying for you, and if you experience that again, that damage to your psyche could be permanent. As the days go on and Penny continues to go, like, where's my dad? Like, I supposedly heard him on the phone, but that could have been anyone. I haven't talked to him for 10 years. And she starts to get closer to Robert and confides in him that something just doesn't seem right. He begins to help with the investigation. He finds candle drippings and some other clues that point to these experiences not just being in Penny's head. It's even Robert who suggests, like, if something has happened to your father, who gets the inheritance? Well, Penny, except if she's dead or incapacitated. And he posits that if they have a body of her father, it must be kept in a cold place. So they check the freezer, there's nothing, but then they check the very cold pool, and yes, her father's body is there. So Penny and Robert plan to go to the police, but as they are driving, Robert sees Jane up ahead on the side of the road waving them down. And Penny's like, we can't stop. And he's like, no, that would seem suspicious. So let me stop and get out and talk to her. As he leaves and Penny waits, the car begins to roll downhill. And as she tries to grab the steering wheel to correct it from the back seat, we see that in the front seat is her dad's dead body. And the car goes down over a cliff into the ocean. Cut back to Jane and Robert, and they embrace. Gasp! We hear how they've basically concocted this plan. The father's will left everything to Penny, as I said, unless she was incapacitated or dead. So they had planned to basically make Penny think she was going insane so that they could put her into a home. But because she wasn't believing things, Robert was like, well, we have to kill her. Jane clearly wasn't super wanting to kill anyone. So she did so reluctantly. And she even said, like, oh, if only my husband, her father, hadn't had that terrible accident. And Robert laughs and says, like, you actually think he died of an accident? And then explains to her how, like, they went swimming and he held him under the water.
Robert's just been killing people from day one.
God damn it, Bob.
That boy ain't right.
Dang it, Bobby. So the next morning, we see that Jane and Robert are at the police station, and they are going over, you know, what happened and the events leading up to this car going off. And they say, like, oh yeah, her father arrived home early this morning or late last night, and they decided to go for a drive to catch up, and then this happened. But then we see Dr. Gerard also talking to the police outside of this line of sight from Jane and Robert. So it's like, what's going on there? The police ask Robert to come with to basically the scene of the accident to identify the vehicle, while Jane heads home to speak with the lawyer. And the lawyer, going over everything, has like no mention of Penny in the will. And when Jane asks about Penny in particular, the lawyer's like, no, Penny died 3 weeks ago. Dun, dun, dun.
That store's been closed for 40 years.
As the lawyer's leaving, he's like, by the way, is that young woman all right? And Jane looks, and there's Penny sitting in her wheelchair at the top of the cliff in the backyard that overlooks the ocean. So Jane approaches her, and Penny explains that she is actually Maggie, Penny's longtime aide and good friend.
Companion is the word that they frequently use, which I bring up only because that word has a history in being a euphemism for lesbians.
But even if you were thinking like, well, no, companion is also just the name of like someone who's a longtime aide. Mm-hmm. When Penny died, she left everything to Maggie. Mm-hmm. Like, they gay.
Yeah,
they're really good friends.
She has a line, Maggie has a line where she says like, we were very close.
Yes.
Which is like as close as the movie gets to spelling it out for you.
And she also says it in that way. Like, mm-hmm. It's very funny. So she explains that as Penny's depression worsened after the death of her mother, Maggie wrote to her father about a visit, but he cautioned to wait because things seemed weird here in France. When Penny committed suicide, Maggie called him to let him know. So then when she received a letter from him inviting Penny to stay with him in France, she was very confused. So she contacted his friend, Dr. Gerard, to help come up with a way to investigate what the heck is going on.
I love this because, like, the movie plays it so that you will suspect that Jane and Gerard are the ones pulling the gaslighting on Penny. And then you realize it's Robert and Jane. And then you find out that actually Maggie and Gerard have been gaslighting Jane the whole time, with a lot of Gerard's conversations about like, oh yeah, Penny's mental health is really like fractured and the slightest thing will make her go mad, kind of being viewed in a new light as like, see, he's letting Jane know like, oh, the plan's working, right? But also Gerard has this really uncomfortable conversation with Penny where he suggests that her disability is all in her head. And Penny very rightfully like pushes back really hard on that. Like, no, I've seen x-rays, like my back is broken. But in hindsight, that becomes like a thing to put an uncertainty in Jane's head about like, you know, like, did Penny survive? How is she up on the hill? Why didn't they find her body in the car? Et cetera, et cetera. It's a really good double twist.
So Maggie gets up from the chair and leaves Jane on the cliff. And Jane's kind of like, what the fuck? What a mind fuck. So Robert, he had been at the scene of the accident, and then he hears how only the father's body was found in the car. So he rushes home, and as he does so, he passes the lawyer, who's like, yeah, I've just left Jane and that strange woman in the chair. So Robert's like, fuck, she's still here. And so he like careens up towards the house, enters the house searching for where Penny might be, and then sees someone sitting in the wheelchair on the cliffside. And so he runs up and just like 300 kick, like the kick from the movie 300, her off the cliff before realizing that it's Jane.
Yeah, she was just like sitting in the chair, overwhelmed with, what had all happened.
And it's very fun the way that like the editing kind of works, because we do get a shot of Jane going like, no, from like the cliff, and we see her like in the ocean on the like at the bottom of the cliff. It's wild. And then Robert's like, oh shit, and then Maggie, Dr. Gerard, and the police come in off screen to arrest him. At one point, Dr. Gerard turns to Maggie and he's like, don't worry, there's nothing else for you here. You can head home. Like, it's very like a somber end, even though I was laughing at Jane getting pushed off the cliff. But
it's very funny to me because the way that like the inspector and Gerard and Maggie come in from off screen after Robert pushes Jane over the cliff implies that they were kind of just standing around watching him murder Jane and then waited to come in to be like, all right, you're guilty of murder. Let's go.
Yeah, no one rushes in to be like, wait, no.
Yeah.
So that's the end. So as I said in the opening, this movie has great direction, great cinematography from Douglas Slocum. When Penny arrives into the airport, I think that's like a great example of the cinematography and direction working really well together to make it feel like very busy and very crowded with like these very interesting like moving camera close-ups, when actually like there's probably no one in this airport. So I thought it was really well done. I think that the fact that they were on site in France for so many moments really helped the picture feel rooted in the real world and honestly feel expensive.
They did a really smart thing here of the house and like the rooms in the house that we need to go to and like the courtyard that's kind of a main area is all clearly something like they built on a soundstage. And then a lot of the movie is set there so that the only times we're away from the house are very minimized, and we're actually in Nice on the French Riviera for those scenes, and like minimizing the amount of scenes that those are allows us to actually spend the money to go there and do it, which then sort of like completes the illusion when we're at the house that this is all like one space and we're in that location, right?
I don't think this movie would have worked in color.
No. And that was a huge thing that impressed me here. Watching this movie, seeing the black and white cinematography, it was like, oh, somebody at Hammer, not somebody, Douglas Slocum knows how to shoot a movie like Nicholas Musaraka, the 1940s RKO cinematographer for Val Lewton, because that's what this movie looks like. This movie looks like a Val Lewton movie.
And even to the fact that like it's female focused, it's like a psychological thing. Like it feels very much in line with that. So I think, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. Fantastic
use of light and shadows to sort of emulate the mood of late night uncertainty. Sangster was absolutely right to insist on black and white, because if I could be allowed like a cinematography digression.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you be? This is like our podcast. We can fucking do whatever we want.
Okay, that's fair. So one of the things that is scary about nighttime is that it's hard to see. I feel like that's really obvious. But for me personally, like one of the spookiest, eeriest things are those moments at night when like your eyes haven't quite like resolved what you're looking at. And, the broom down at the end of the hall could be a person. And you have that moment like, whoa, what's up with that? And like that sort of like poorly recognized shape in the darkness. And the way that human eyes work, you don't actually have color eyesight at night. Like when it is extremely dark, you basically are only perceiving things in like shades of blue, that kind of cool blue moonlight. That's the only light source, and it's not enough light source for your eyes to really pick up color. And that's one of the things that can cause those kinds of illusions of shapes where you're like, oh, what was that? And there's this uncertainty, sometimes when you're walking through your house late at night and you kind of spook yourself because you see something weird. A modern movie that did this really well for me is Hereditary.
Yeah.
Which really captured that thing of like just having someone standing perfectly still in the background corner of a very dark shot. And Hereditary was able to do that because they really mastered a look for night shooting that emulates human vision. In the 1960s, we don't have that capability. Our night shooting capabilities are not very good. And so there's kind of only 3 ways to shoot at night in the 1960s. One is it's actually nighttime and we're on location, but we have some big ass lights to really like make an area very bright. The other is day for night, which never looks right because it's actually the opposite kind of shadows and light than what you actually get at night. And the third method is to be on a soundstage. And one of the things that even if you're using like kind of a blue light on set to like emulate moonlight, that you can't really get in 1960s films because of the light needed to expose the film and the expectations of color photography, is that kind of monochrome uncertainty at night, right? So think of the Hammer movies we've watched, and you think of Curse the Werewolf or Revenge of Frankenstein, and even if it's nighttime and they've got like a cool blue moonlight out, like you can see that like Victor Frankenstein's coat is like a sage green, and that like the blood from the guy he just killed is ketchup red, right?
Yeah.
You shoot in black and white and you restore that visual uncertainty to the frame, even if you're using a lot of light so that the audience can see what the heck's going on. You're not shooting in darkness, but you're shooting in light in monochrome, so it mimics that. And so that's one of the reasons why black and white can be really effective for a horror movie like this. And I think one of the key things that they do with the cinematography here to amplify this is that Holt and Slocombe do a fantastic job of really putting us in the position of Maggie as Penny in the chair. There's a lot of scenes where she like is wandering around the house at night and, hearing sounds that might be her dad, or what's that shape off in the distance? Is that her dad, or whatever? These kind of like nightmare scenes where the tension and the suspense really gets ratcheted up. They do this great job of creating an atmosphere. There's a lot of great like nightmare imagery in these kind of nighttime uncertainty scenes. The movie got me actually multiple times with scares in this movie.
Okay.
Like I jumped quite a few times for real. I am very susceptible to the motionless person you can't quite see in the dark. And the ghoulish deployment of the father's dead body in like several different places along the way.
Yeah.
That was effective for me each time, whether it's him sitting in the chair and staring at her from the summer house the first time, or the time where he's sitting in the chair in her room and his head kind of rolls down, or when we actually do see him dead in the pool, or the time in the front seat or whatever. But what they do that's really smart here is they keep the camera kind of at the eye level of someone sitting in a wheelchair as it moves through the scenes.
Yes, we have so many point of view shots throughout all of this, which really works to put you in the mind of, at the time that you think, someone who is looking for their father.
Yeah, and you're looking around the frame and you're trying to see what's going on, and they keep the camera at that eye level. They also tend to do a lot of moving camera to give you that sense of the chair moving. But the other thing they do really well is by foregrounding sort of her point of view, is it really communicates effectively to the audience the limited mobility, right? Like she can only move in certain ways and she can only move at certain speeds, and she can't like back up very fast, and she can't turn very fast, and things like this, which then effectively heighten the tension and the scariness of the movie. It's sort of on paper kind of a cheap trick to give your protagonist a disability that then
she literally can't leave the house because the door to the outside has steps leading down to the road. So she literally cannot leave.
Yeah. And it really like, gives her these kind of boundaries on what she can and can't do. And on paper, it's like a little bit of a cheap ploy or cheap trick to limit the protagonists in certain ways so that you can pull off the rest of the gaslighting, right? But the way it's achieved in the movie is extremely effective and really lets us feel how terrifying it is to be limited in that way.
And I think it's also important to note that, like, yeah, I was worried they were going to do something cheap. And the only time that the fact that she's in a wheelchair really comes into play is as she's quickly getting away from the summer house with the first scare. She wheels a little bit too close to the pool and she falls in. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything beyond the fact that she can't explore the whole house. She's reliant on Robert to explore the upstairs, where the fact that she has a disability really plays in.
But it really does a good job of like explaining how they can pull off the con or expect to pull off the con on her. Cause it's like, well, you can really control like what she can see and when, right?
And I also want to say to the point of view shots, yes, the camera is at eye level, but there's this like it's not quite a squeak, but this characteristic sound of the wheelchair as she's rolling it. So every time she does like an arm stroke, it has this sound. So it feels more tense than if it was just like silent steps on carpet.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up the scene where she falls into the pool, and I want to talk a little bit more about that scene later for one of my few nitpicks about this movie. But to continue on the like praise train, for a lot of the running time, I found the plot very predictable. La Diabolique is the obvious touchstone, but frankly, we've been seeing stories about people gaslighting women into insanity in order to collect inheritance money since at least The Cat and the Canary.
Yeah.
Right? But I was still immensely enjoying myself anyway because of how superbly everything was being done. Direction, cinematography, editing, set design, lighting, costumes, cast, performances, etc., etc., etc.
The acting is really, really well done. Yeah, the animosity between Jane and Penny as their actors, I think, plays out on screen in a really interesting way. And I want to say, like, the editing choices for the movie throughout the entire thing really enhanced the twist of Penny being Maggie, and then seeing that twist play out on the faces of Jane and Robert.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also just like, it's done in such a great way by having the lawyer be so matter of fact about it that it really gives like the audience a little bit of a like, wait, what the fuck?
Yeah, and like Jane's like a literal look of horror, and the lawyer's like, oh, well, I'll give you some space. Like, okay, I'll leave you alone.
Because the conversation is like, she's like, well, I had Penny at the house and then she died in an accident. And the lawyer's like, no, Penny killed herself like 3 weeks ago. What are you talking about? She's like, but she was right here. And the lawyer's like, cool, I'll just be going.
And I think like the editing choices really enhance that overall storytelling. And I'm curious, like, as you, a writer, a director, someone who has done editing, like, do you think that that's more along the lines of what direction would have been in the script? Or do you think that's a result of the fact that our director here, Holt, is a director-editor?
It's difficult to say. I think the thing is that we've seen Sangster written movies before. And so, whereas we haven't seen like a Holt directed movie before. Honestly, this feels like a step above a lot of Sangster's other stuff. And I think that might be attributable to Seth Holt.
I'm glad you agree with me. Because, like, Sangster, you're great as an adapter. The stuff that we've liked from him has been adapting novels. The Diabolique started as a novel. Like, all of that onto film. But is he a good original writer? Because the stuff we've seen from him where it's like, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like in that prison, I brought it up, where it's an OG script.
Yeah.
And it's bad.
Well, I think the thing that made Sangster really smart about Dracula and Frankenstein was finding like new takes on old material.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that's smart here too, right? Now, I do feel like I've seen some version of this double twist before where like the person running the con is actually the victim of the con, but it was still quite surprising here. Like, I was legit on the edge of my seat, like watching the last like 15 minutes of this movie going like, what the fuck is going on? Even though like I clocked that Robert was working with Jane really early.
Yes, you did.
Like I was like, yep, because the thing was that for them to be gaslighting her about the number of things that they clearly were, Jane had to have someone else in the house helping her, and it didn't make sense that it was Gerard, right? But I was still highly enjoying myself through the movie. And then when they murdered Penny, I figured what we were going to get was still something in the mold of La Diabolique, where the lead character dies and then the police show up to arrest everybody. But I was intrigued to see like how it would resolve. Like I literally joked after Penny died, like, okay, here's where Columbo shows up.
Yeah.
Right. But the last 15 minutes of this movie really floored me. The double bluff is really effectively pulled off. A lot of that's writing, but a lot of it's the cast and the editing and all these other tricks of the trade, as it were. I think the one thing that really falls flat to me, and it's not when you're watching the movie, it's just one of those like, you know, when you walk away and you go, wait a minute, that doesn't quite make sense, right? Things is, and I'm so curious because we know that Susan Strasberg is a method actress. Her dad invented, well, he didn't really invent method acting. He brought it to the US. Now, it's important here to maybe stress what the method actually is versus, I think, popular conception of method acting.
Yeah, I think popular conception is Jared Leto going overboard as the Joker. Like,
well, it's the popular understanding of method acting is the Daniel Day-Lewis, I'm in character all the time thing. That's not quite what method acting is. Method acting and why it was a big deal when it became a thing in the 50s in Hollywood film acting. Method acting is about trying to align your emotions and motivations with the characters. So you think about what the character's motivation is in the scene, what they want, what they're trying to do. You think about the emotions, and it's almost kind of a game of like, if you were in this situation, what would you do? You're trying to submerge yourself into the character to the point where you're feeling the character's emotions and you're reacting the way the character would. And the idea is that this is going to give you a more
authentic
performance. realistic, authentic performance, a performance that can do unexpected things, right? And can give you surprising results because it's coming from like a real place. It feels more alive. It doesn't feel as rehearsed or whatever. The reason this was like a big change from acting in the past is that the version of acting, I don't know what to call it because I'm not versed in the history as much, but the version of acting that you had before this was very mannered. And that doesn't necessarily mean stilted, but the idea before was like, if method is, okay, the character is sad, so the actor should feel sad, and that will make the actor look sad on camera, The previous style was to think, okay, people who are sad do this with their mouths and this with their eyes, and their voice tends to tremble like this. Use your body as an instrument on purpose to mimic those things, and that will fool the audience into thinking you're sad.
Literally performing.
Yes. So the previous style of acting, which you could have like the Laurence Olivier style, basically, is kind of an outside-in approach. You start with all of the outside stuff, and that produces a illusion of a person. And method is a very inside-out response where you become the person, and then that translates into the performance. Here's the thing. Susan Strasberg does an amazing job in this movie. She's fantastic. She looks great too. She shot really well, and she like she could have been, I don't know, like based on this movie, it's like she could have been like an Audrey Hepburn. Like, she's amazing. I sometimes wonder watching it if she is playing Penny or if she's playing Maggie playing Penny. Mm-hmm. Because if the point of method is to like merge yourself with the character and give the responses that would be authentic to the character, the audience does not know that Maggie is running a con on Jane and Robert. But Maggie knows that. The audience doesn't know. A lot of these scenes that are my favorite scenes in the movie that are really scary and spooky and have all this great atmosphere and suspense and tension that I'm talking about, we're following around Penny in the wheelchair, and we're point of view, and we're very much with her, as we've said already. Jane's not around, Robert's not around, but Penny's giving all these authentic, fearful reactions anyways. Is Penny, or rather is Maggie, really getting freaked out by all this stuff, even though she kind of already knows that there's something weird going on? Or are these fearful reactions meant to be in case someone's watching? And that's a little bit of a fine hair to split. I recognize that. But then we get to when she accidentally falls into the pool. Because Penny can't walk or swim. Maggie can, though. But in order for the con to work, Maggie essentially has to pretend she can't swim and nearly drown, hoping that Robert or someone will come rescue her. And so it's a little bit of a trick, a little bit of a con that the movie's playing on us, that she doesn't, that her own instincts as a person don't kick in, and she doesn't just swim her own way out of the pool, because she doesn't know whether she's being watched or not, right? But that's the movie playing a trick on us. And that is a level of artifice that I'm curious, like how that interacted with Susan Strasberg's method acting, because the method acting, in my opinion, would suggest that what Maggie would do is not drown in the pool for the sake of appearances, right? So that's just like one of those little things. It's one of those little threads that you can pull off from the movie way after you've seen it, when you've had a moment to like think about it. When you're watching the movie, of course, none of this comes to your mind because you're following the story and you're on the roller coaster, right? But I also wonder how much of this was maybe also part of the problem that Ann Todd had, where she was from that older style of acting, where, the it's called acting, damn it, style of acting. Therefore, you have that artifice that kind of, honestly, in some ways makes everything easier because you're just pretending. I don't know. Anyways, it's just something I've been thinking about.
Okay. Well, I know you kind of went into some critiques. I'm going to take us back to the praise train.
Sure.
Because I wanted to make a point about the music.
Oh, yeah. The music's great.
The music itself, really fantastic. But I want to specifically call out the choice of when it was used. Because there's no music in the opening. Mm-hmm. Even like, I think we have it during the credits. I don't remember. But like, there are points where like it's dead silent. You have foley, but like you're fine. And then when the music comes in, it doesn't feel like a relief sometimes. Like sometimes it feels like it's adding tension. So I think it's very, very cool when music can be used to feel both its presence and absence equally as powerful.
I think this movie does a really cool thing with its music that is very common and taken for granted now, which is understanding that like you can create a lot of tension by dropping the music out when the action is happening, which is also something that we used to see in the RKO movies.
Yeah.
But I think there's a trend in old Hollywood movies where music gets played when there's action on scene and not when there's dialogue, which is kind of understandable in like the 30s and 40s where it's like, well, you want people to be able to hear the dialogue.
And we're still figuring out how this sound stuff works.
Sure. And you want to like not have the action scenes feel dead, right? Mm-hmm. But what that gives you a lot of times is scores that are very
bombastic.
Yes. And with Hammer especially, I'm really used to bombastic, Dracula, and we're used to like when bad things happen, it's bum, 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 Instead, in this movie, they have music during the dialogue that carries the emotions, mm-hmm. and they drop the music out for the scary bits, or the tension bits, I should say.
Yeah, and like, it was just like really unique. And I think you bring up other Hammer movies, particularly like their recent Hammer movies. This doesn't feel like a Hammer movie.
No.
Like all the way down to like its use of music. It's not in color. It's modern or contemporary, I guess is the word I mean.
Yeah. It feels like RKO.
It feels like RKO. Before you brought up that connection to RKO, I was just thinking within the realm of Hammer, and I was like, I don't think Hammer has put out something that felt kind of like this since the early Quatermass.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Which had kind of that more
realistic feeling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think the other thing about the RKO stuff, when you go back to that stuff in the 40s, and especially when you look at Cat People or I Walked with a Zombie, is, to bring something full circle around to where we started, the RKO stuff was very literally like, here is the exact midpoint between film noir and gothic horror.
Yeah.
Right? Like very literally. And that's kind of how you were feeling about with this movie.
Yeah. When we covered Le Diabolique, that felt much more thriller to me. Taste of Fear feels closer to horror, and I think a big part of that is with the camera movement and so many point of view shots. I think the fact that they use a corpse instead of an impersonator. Mm-hmm. And when the twist happens, that are who we thought were villains are actually victims. In particular, Jane, she goes through a series of emotions that are more horrific than something that feels more akin to noir. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh no, instead of Anne, oh no, I've stolen the wrong thing. It's a like, oh God, who did I kill?
Right. Yeah. What the fuck is going on? The difference here is that if it was and I think it's really good that you bring up this question of genre, right? This thriller versus horror question, because absolutely you can feel the bones of like psychological thriller and its development. And the fact is that that's going to become a thing distinct from horror, I think. It's still a very murky division, even to today, but I think there are key differences. Mm-hmm. But right now we're still following this development, and this movie is clearly horror, even though it's clearly descended from Le Diabolique. So we're still like connected enough, right? I think a big thing you are so smart in identifying is that a big determining factor is Jane, because in the thriller version of this movie, Penny, aka Maggie, like lives, and she like swims up from the car and she meets with Gerard and the inspector on the beach. And it's like, well, they did in fact try to kill me like we thought they would. Let's go up to the house and arrest them. And then it's like, oh no, Robert and Jane have like recognized their mistake and they've booked like a flight to Paris and we've got to catch them at the air, or like whatever. It becomes like a chase. Like we got to catch them. Mm-hmm. Instead, we stick with Robert and Jane and we get the reverse gaslighting. And we get that great moment where the lawyer says that Penny's been dead for 3 weeks or whatever. And Jane's just like, "What?" And it's the ghost story moment where it's like, what are you talking about? That store has been closed for 50 years. Like it's exactly that ghost story moment. And I think that's why it's horror, because we switch our POV.
Yeah.
And we keep our POV with the person, whether it's Maggie or Jane, like we've kept our POV with the person who's getting freaked out by stuff, essentially.
Yeah. How nice it is to see gaslighters get their comeuppance with a mindfuck of their own.
I think all in all, this is tremendously pulled off from script to screen. Fantastic work from everyone involved. And it solved one of my biggest issues with Le Diabolique, which is I am not a really big fan of the fact that the girl dies, the lead character, which feels really like cruel and mean and unfair and unnecessary. Like the villains win in their plan to scare her to death. And like, that's fine. That's like an acceptable thing to have happen in the movie. And then it becomes the thriller where how do they get caught? Except that in Le Diabolique, they get caught like 5 minutes later. Like the girl dies and they're like, "Ha, we have won." And then they like open a door into the next room and the inspector's like, "No, you have not. I'm here to arrest you." And it's like, again, it's like you just stood there and let that innocent girl die.
Whereas here, we don't care as much because Jane had it coming.
Right. And the innocent girl doesn't die or is already dead. I suppose it's worth saying explicitly that by the time you've finished the movie, it is recontextualized. The opening where they pull a girl out of the lake is that's probably Penny.
Yeah, as you're watching the movie, Maggie as Penny says that her mom committed suicide by going into a lake. Mm-hmm. And so you think like, oh, that opening scene was the mom dying. So that's what you first think. It's a really neat, I was going to call it a Kuleshov effect. It's not a Kuleshov effect, but it has a similar feel.
What she says is that they found her mom drowned and that she never believed it because her mom was such a strong swimmer.
Yeah.
Which implies that there was something purposeful to it. And then we find out later that Penny had committed suicide. It's really smart. It's really good. Strong lesbian subtext. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
So are we thinking it's horror enough then to rank?
Yes.
Cool.
I'm like, is there any question? But it's good to specifically call it out.
So I'm going to warn you, Sarah, I'm looking really high.
Yeah.
I'm looking like top 50.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. As long as like we're in the same-ish area.
Well, here's the thing, Ben. Le Diabolique, which if you want to hear more about is episode 174. It's ranked at number 26. Mm-hmm. Does this go above or below that?
So that's kind of how I built my range, right? So I started with Le Diabolique at 26. I worked my way up the list trying to figure, what's the thing that this is, what's definitely better than this. And what's funny is the most recent Hammer film before this, well, not really actually, but the biggest Hammer film before this is Curse of the Werewolf. And we ranked that at number 20. Mm-hmm. Right above that is one of those RKO movies, Isle of the Dead. Isle of the Dead is really spooky in a lot of the same ways that this movie is, at least for me. They felt like they evoked a similar emotional response in me. I think Isle of the Dead is scarier, so my ceiling for my range was number 20, that this would just go right above Curse of the Werewolf. Working my way down to find a floor, looking below Le Diabolique, I ended up with another movie that feels weirdly comparable, which is Lake of the Dead, Todesstern, at number 39. And that's also like really creepy and has lake stuff. And so right below that is Fiend Without a Face. I think this is better than Fiend Without a Face, which is a fun movie, but I think this is better. So my range was 20 to 40, which kind of puts La Diabolique like somewhere in the middle there.
Okay. Well, my range is directly within your range. Like you, I started with La Diabolique, and I liked this a lot better than La Diabolique. So La Diabolique is my floor.
Okay.
What is also interesting is Quatermass Experiment is directly above that. And I didn't realize that when I had first been writing my notes and thinking like this feels like early Hammer, like with Quatermass. But I feel like I hope it's not like a personal bias or anything, but like this kind of spookiness hits me harder in, it's probably the gothicness, honestly, so it is like personal preference, but it hits me harder than like a sci-fi thing, unless the sci-fi thing is doing a gothic thing like Event Horizon. Anyways, I digress. So I continued looking up, and my eyes also fell upon Isle of the Dead, and I agree with you. Isle of the Dead feels like, it's interesting, like we're both trapped in like similar ways on this island. You may not leave the island. You cannot leave this house because it wasn't built to be
wheelchair accessible.
Yeah. But what I struggled with was Curse of the Werewolf.
Yeah.
And how that interacts with this movie. And so I made my range Isle of the Dead down to La Diabolique.
So I'll tell you what, Sarah, the thing is, Curse of the Werewolf's really good. Oliver Reed's great in it. Good makeup, great gore, scary movie, fantastic, goes above and beyond. It's also kind of a fucking mess, though.
It is.
Because it's kind of like an entirely different movie for like the first 45 minutes, and it doesn't really get to like the story until halfway through, and then it just kind of speed runs through your standard Wolfman beats.
Yeah, I would take issue with the idea of speedrun because that implies that they're rushing.
They're not rushing, but it's just recognizing that like there's only so much story here.
And right below Curse of the Werewolf is City of the Dead, which is another amazing gothic movie. A similar feeling of being trapped. We're in this small town. I think it's really comparable to Taste of Fear. I think it's just a matter of like, how do you take your poison?
The thing about Taste of Fear, and the reason why I think it might go above Curse of the Werewolf, is that on a writing level, every part of Taste of Fear is part of the whole.
Yeah.
All the clues add up. Everything that's in here is serving a purpose in the story. Every line of dialogue, like every weird thing that doesn't seem connected at first, all the like strange sort of references to like swimming, like all these things that feel kind of like they don't really connect, all connect at the end. Whereas like, why there's so much stuff in Curse of the Werewolf where it's like, why did we spend 20 minutes with this beggar or whatever?
It's a mess of an adaptation, whereas Taste of Fear does not have that issue. Sangster knows how to adapt something.
Yeah,
Sure.
Like on a writing level from script up, this movie was in a better spot.
Yeah, cool. I think with that reasoning, it makes sense to go above. I think like similarly, and also with like the way it really hones in on that psychological aspect of putting you with these characters, to me that makes it a much more visceral feeling than like Black Sunday, The Body Snatcher. So yeah, I'm happy with this.
Cool. So entering the list at the new number 20 is Taste of Fear, aka Scream of Fear, from 1961, directed by Seth Holt.
If you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to all of the other episodes that we have mentioned today, as well as all of the other Val Lewton movies. Always want to plug those because they are pretty much across the board very good. If you would like to contest this or any other ranking, though, you can drop us a line through our Ask Box on Tumblr, or you can email us at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com.
Scream Scene updates every other Wednesday on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, and a variety of other podcasting apps, including YouTube. If you'd like to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to our RSS feed. RSS feeds, they're a weird and cool way of browsing the internet without algorithms. Look into them more.
You know what RSS stands for?
What?
Really super sweet.
I don't think that's right. Anyways, if you'd really like to support the show, if you really like what we do, we'd really appreciate it if you could head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast. There, you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Sign up and you'll hear your name thanked on the show. And at the higher levels, $5 and $10 respectively, you'll get access to bonus content, including deleted outtakes from past episodes, a lot of like bonus episodes on like horror adjacent films and all kinds of cool bonus stuff we've done over the years, music, audiobooks. It's a lot of cool stuff up there. And at $10, you get access to writing, lots of like reviews and essays and short fiction. It's a lot of cool stuff over there. And I recommend you check it out. That's patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast.
So what are we watching next week, Ben?
Next week, Sarah, we're watching a movie I've never seen, but I've heard a lot about. It has been described to me as a nightmarish, dreamlike fantasy film.
Oh, you love those.
And it's like, it is horror, but it's kind of something like more than horror. It's some elevated horror up in here. I have no idea what to expect, but I've heard good things. It is a little indie movie called Night Tide.
Keeping that swimming thing going, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.